Hey YouTube, welcome to Comics and Stuff. Happy Saturday. Sorry that I missed yesterday, but I decided to go out with my family instead, so I guess it's more sorry, not sorry. Welcome back. We're going to be talking today about a brief history of Charlton Comics. It's going to be the latest addition to my Comic Histories playlist that people seem to really be liking. I know that I've mentioned Charlton Comics a lot, so I've decided to make a video about their history. Before I dive into that, though, like normal, want to remind you guys, make sure you give lots of love to the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and check out the new Redbubble store. Link is in the description below. You can get your official Comics and Stuff t-shirt, as well as my latest design, which is a Straight Outta Comic-Con shirt. Picture should be in the corner. But having said that, let's go right into a brief history of Charlton Comics. So Charlton Comics, and like normal, I have my notes here. So starting in the 1940s, so Charlton was absolutely notorious for using unpublished materials from like other publishing companies, stuff that they scrapped. They basically acquired their junk and published it. It was really cool. In any case, they were founded by John St. Angelo Sr. and Ed Levy in 1940 under the name of the Two Charles Company. Not sure what the two meant, but whatever, it was there. 1946, so 6 years after opening, they changed their name to Charlton Comics, and the first comic they actually published was called Yellow Jacket, which came out in 1944, September 1944. During the early years of opening, they had more than 5 different imprints, which apparently for back in those days was not super common for their first few years to have more than 5 imprints. And each one of a weird thing was each one of their names had to do with either Frank or Charles in the name of the imprints. Why, I don't know, but that's how it is. Moving in to the 1950s, so 1951, Charlton hired a new staff of artists, writers, creators, and editors, which included their future managing editor, which is Dick Giordano, Dick Giordano. I can never pronounce his last name, but I think you know who I'm talking about. And also prolific writer Joe Gill, which is, you know who Joe Gill is. They also had Al Fago as their in-house editor. So some pretty big golden age names when they first started. Charlton's early comics, they were known for being very gory horror comics. One of their primary lines of books was Steve Ditko's The Thing, which, and you know who Steve Ditko is. And The Thing is still iconic today as a horror character. In 1954, Charlton acquired the rights to Fawcett Comics lines, so that included all of their romance, sci-fi, western, and horror titles, including the Strange Suspense Stories, which was Fawcett's most successful title. Charlton also purchased the rights to the character Blue Beetle, who would later become part of the DC characters roster, and then from the by then defunct Fox Feature Syndicate. So they, like I said, they're notorious for getting other companies' stuff and just bringing it in. But that kind of wraps it up for the 1950s. In the 1960s, a lot of their headlining characters for Charlton, many would become part of the DC roster. So they had characters like Captain Atom, The Question, Ted Cord, which was the second Blue Beetle, and then the Son of Vulcan, who some historians will call Charlton's answer to Marvel's Thor. That was their answer to Thor. That was his competition with Charlton. I don't know. And then also in the 1960s, they launched their new line of Fightin' Comics, which was kind of their attempt to keep up with Marvel and DC, because Marvel and DC were exploding while a lot of other publishers were slowly falling behind. Many were affected by the Comics Code Authority, and some were just not able to keep up with the times like Marvel and DC were. Also in the 1960s, so Pat Masuli, he started running Charlton's romance comics, and they totally flourished in quality, both in quality and quantity. In 1967, Steve Ditko came to work for Charlton full-time after he had a falling out with Marvel Comics. And here's a fun fact for you guys. So Danny O'Neill, even though he's known for his work with like Green Lantern and Green Arrow, he actually got his start in the 1960s with Charlton. Now, 1967, most of the superhero titles from Charlton had been canceled and replaced with licensed materials from Hanna-Barbera. So they were doing comics like the Jetsons, the Flintstones, etc. And they also acquired characters from the Fox Feature Syndicate, like I had said. So they were doing characters like Flash Gordon, Jungle Jim, and Beetle Bailey. 1970s. So anyhow, George Waldman was hired as an artist in 1969, and by 1972 he was editor, and Nick Cuddy was hired as his assistant editor as well in 1972. So under Nick Cuddy, the cult classic title Haunted Romance, which was like a horror romance comic, began, and the line continued for while most other romance lines from Charlton had kind of like fizzled out. So it was a pretty popular book. 1973, Nick Cuddy also, along with John Byrne, Joe Staton, Bob Layton, and others began publishing under the Charlton comic imprint, Charlton Bullseye. So again, some big names. Charlton worked with a lot of really big names in the comic book industry. And with Charlton Bullseye, they created characters like Captain Atom, and then they also went on to create the iconic Charlton character E-Man. And then 1977, unfortunately, this is where Charlton starts to see their decline, with most of their talent moving to DC or Marvel. 1980s, again, this is where they start to close up, so the sales were on decline. They were losing business really fast, so in 1981 they attempted a revival of Bullseye, but ultimately failed. And then their current editor in 1985, which was T.C. Ford, he attempted to, again, for a third time with Bullseye, but with that final act, they ended up going out of business. So in 1986, a year later, the rights to a lot of their characters, such as, like the Phantom, were purchased by entrepreneur Robert Broughton, who attempted to publish a lot of these characters under the American Comics Group name. So the original American Comics Group had also gone out of business and had their name purchased by Broughton. And so he eventually changed the name to Charlton Media Group and tried to bring all the comic books from both American Comics Group and Charlton back, but ultimately failed. So the guy had a dream, and he lost it. So that's unfortunate. Moving on to the 1990s. So 1999, the official Charlton building was demolished, and then you move into the 2000s. And in 2000, a Charlton fanzine, which was like a fan publication, launched where they started reprinting old Charlton books. So that was pretty cool. And then coming up in 2014, Charlton Neo, which was a company that was inspired by the original Charlton, they kind of gained ownership to a lot of the rights of their characters that hadn't been picked up by DC or Marvel or what have you, and started to begin issuing reprints. And then as of last year, 2017, they also announced that they have a deal with AC Comics. And for those of you who don't know, AC Comics is a comics group that is dedicated to keeping, canceled or Golden Age, Silver Age characters that are currently floating around without ownership. They kind of keep them alive. They continue to reprint their books. So Neo Charlton has an agreement with them, and they'll start to relaunch a lot of their Golden Age characters and start reprinting a lot of their stories. But that is the entirety of the brief history of Charlton Comics. So thanks for tuning in. I hope that was informative for you guys. And make sure that you like, share, comment below what I could have done better or what you liked about the video. And yeah, that's really it. So I will see you guys next week. I'm off to go see Black Panther. So have a great night, YouTube. Bye.